Welcome to the Total Wireless Store, where total confidence awaits.
Music powers my morning runs, but data overages slow me down.
Don't worry, you got this with the Total Wireless Store. Just bring your number and get 10 gigs of lightning-fast 4G LTE data with unlimited talk and text for $40 a month.
I'd run to the Total Wireless Store right now for that deal, if I wasn't already here.
Data girl.
Discover the Total Wireless Stores and get total confidence. The latest phones, the best network, all at great prices. Excludes TracFone Wireless Inc. brand sports. $40 plan must remain active to keep bonus data after 12/31/18. Terms at stores.totalwireless.com.
All telling ourselves a story. You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting to danger. Unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution. Radio.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
This is Thomas, a.k.a. a Mad Painter. I'd like you to join me Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Open Canvas. Don't forget to bring an open mind.
Yes, folks, that's right. Bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. UFOs to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha and welcome to the Cosmos Connection, and I am your host, Sasha Lessin. Theresa J. Morris is on her way. Hopefully she'll get here somewhere in the first hour. And I am here with Dr. Sasha Lessin, my beloved husband. He's another host on Sacred Matrix here on Revolution Radio. And our producer is Thomas Becker. And today our very special guest is Russell Brinegar. We've had him on several of our shows before, and we just love it when Russell joins us. He has a wonderful book called Overlords of the Singularity, and it's so full of information, it's going to take at least a dozen shows to cover it all. But let me tell you a little bit about Russell and his book, Overlords of the Singularity, the manipulation of humankind by hidden UFO intelligences and the quest for transcendence. And following a near-death experience that revealed the underlying interdimensional nature of reality, author Russell Scott Brinegar delves into the conundrum of UFOs and the paranormal, arriving at new theories and speculations concerning the hidden nature of the supernatural, the reality of the so-called flying saucers and their mysterious occupants, the profound cultural influences of UFO lore in the last several decades, and the ultimate purposes and agendas of the UFOs that have haunted Earth's skies for millennia. These theories involve various versions of the simulation hypothesis, i.e. the idea that our reality may be an intentionally... Darius in your content. Please.
Created computer-like matrix.
That we are all embedded within transhumanism, the imminent advent of sentient artificial intelligence, and the relationship between UFO UFOs and the impending technological singularity predicted by futurists to occur somewhere between the years 2045 to 2080. Whether readers are UFO skeptics or believers, Overlords of the Singularity provides much food for thought about many cutting-edge issues of human philosophy and exponentially expanding technology. It's a must-read for UFO skeptics and enthusiasts alike. And before we bring on Russell, Sasha wants to read something.
Yeah, I want to read a few paragraphs from this wonderful book, Overlords of the Singularity, and it's about the Greys, and it's a section called Searching for the Identity of the Greys, and I'm quoting Russell here. Gray alien abductions can occur both in real time and also in altered states of reality. Gray alien abductions involve either combining DNA with alien DNA or manipulating the human genome to produce hybridized, upgraded humans. There appears to be more than one race or species of alien Greys. We don't know if these alien Greys are extraterrestrial, interdimensionals, angels, demons, elementals, inhabitants of Earth's dark energy halo, crypto-territorials, underground or underseas beings, artificial intelligence, biological robots. The Greys could be a transcendent form of humans. They could be specters of our own collective unconscious, denizens of our own future, or a combination. Some of the abductees, such as Betty Andreessen, say that we perhaps are humans, are the larval form of the Greys, and we serve a function for the Greys after we die, that they somehow collect our souls. Maybe the Greys themselves are the overlords of the singularity.
All right, so Russell Brinegar, welcome to our show, The Cosmos Connection.
Thanks for having me.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
It's great to have you back. And let's see, where do we want to begin? I guess we want to talk about these great aliens. Sasha brought them to the forefront. What would you like to know and discuss?
Yeah, well, not just the Greys. I think that you have a better grasp probably than most of us on all the different kinds of contacts and the main kind of aliens reported by people in our space.
Well, there does seem to be a variety of different types of forms, from the Draco Reptilians that you hear a lot about. Some people believe that at least the group connected with the Orion system, the Orion Greys, are actually in cahoots with the Dracos in whatever they do out there in outer space. It seems to have something to do with some sort of dominion, but it's not an invasion like we would ordinarily see in the science fiction movies where a physical spacecraft comes in. They actually do their business from another realm in the mental realms. You know, they have influences over populations. And as you mentioned before, there does seem to be quite a variety. If you look into the Amicizia group that were here on this planet and may still be here from 1956 to 1967, they describe themselves as the precursors to the spiritual realm. And this is a striking correlation. I don't know if you've ever delved into the Urantia book, but there's a species of creature called the Midwayers that are part physical and part spiritual that seem to be able to flow in between the two worlds. And I wonder if something like that may be in order where people can, you know, adjust their vibration and come into the physical realm and then go into these other dimensions. This may be a common practice. We're sort of trapped in a psychological prison, limited by our perceptual apparatus. You know, we only see within a certain visual spectrum, we only hear within a certain spectrum, and there is likely multiple dimensions interlocking with ours that we have no real perception of. There are some people among us that do have perception. We call them the clairvoyants or the physical mediums that seem to be able to see a little bit beyond the normal visual range into the ultraviolet or the infrared and be able to have some type of contact with either discarnate humans that are in between lifetimes or other extraterrestrial beings throughout the universe. So I've been spending a lot of time reading into some of the old channeled material, such as the Urantia book, the Oahspe Bible, a lot of the work of Mark Probert and Meade Lane back in the 40s. And I think some of these folks were onto it. Guy Ballard with the I Am movement, they were referring to the Etherians and saying way back in the 40s that we're not necessarily dealing with physical beings from another planet, but there's interlocking universes like J. Allen Hynek concluded, and other dimensions that apparently in some point in their development, they are able to perceive us or even come here, but we have yet to be able to travel to where they originate from. And I think this is part of the purpose of achieving a technological singularity. Nikola Tesla played around a lot with the spirit radio and claimed that he made some sort of electronic connection with the other side. And I'm pretty sure that somewhere between today and the technological singularity, wherever that comes about, there will be an invention, a technological electronic invention that dissolves the veil between the physical and the unseen worlds. And this may be a crucial piece of equipment that is needed to be able to communicate with a lot of these beings and actually understand who they are and what they really look like. Some of the forms, such as the man, yes.
Can I stop you right there? Because I want to address a couple of you just said a lot of incredibly wonderful things, and I didn't want to get too far down the road and it wouldn't make relevant to address anymore. But there's a lot of YouTubes where they are communicating with the deceased or people in other dimensions. We're not sure exactly where they're coming from. So they're at least bringing through auditory messages. You can clearly hear words. So there's something going on here. You talk about Nikola Tesla and his spirit radio, but there are a lot of people that are able to astrally travel and project, and so they're going into that realm. Have you ever explored the information by the Monroe Institute and Robert Monroe and his books from, I guess they were started in the 50s and 60s and into the 70s or so? I'm not sure exactly what era that was, but he was often encountering these interdimensional beings, and he being male, he was fascinated with astral sex. So he apparently was able to encounter other beings and engage in sexual energy exchanges. What are your thoughts on that? Are some of us actually already doing what these Etherians and these gray aliens and other aliens do, that we are able to bridge the gap between the different realms and travel them?
Stuart Swerdlow says he does.
Right. And Stuart Swerdlow. There's a lot of people. What are your thoughts on astral travel and their correlations with what the Greys are doing and other interdimensional beings?
Well, I wouldn't rule anything out as far as being possible. I'm limited within my own personal experience, and I haven't had any such experiences. So I would have to just rely on the testimony of people who claim that they do have and keep an open mind to that. I really like Richard Dolan's recent interview where he talked about Corey Goode, and he handled that very expertly because Richard Dolan does believe in a secret space program, but a lot of things Corey Goode is saying is beyond his experience, and he just admits that and just leaves it there. And I think that's a great approach instead of, there's a lot of people out there that are throwing slings and arrows towards people who are telling testimonies that they don't completely understand or don't buy into. And everybody just needs to halt that and just keep an open mind, because we're living in a reality that is beyond what we are able to grasp at this moment. So I wouldn't shun out anybody's stories. I recently read Leslie Kean's book, Surviving Death, and she goes into a lot of physical mediumship, and she's pretty well convinced me that materializations do occur. Stuart Alexander is a very quiet physical medium that has met with the same group every week for 30 years. So somebody doesn't stick with that unless there's some really interesting things happening. And they're talking about hands and actual complete human beings that materialize from ectoplasm. So you just have to examine the material, listen to people's testimonies, weigh what resonates with your own sense of what's real and what's not, and just let the rest of it go, and or file it somewhere maybe where you can access it later if you acquire a deeper understanding or more information. George Van Tassel was an excellent contactee that told about deceased human beings being encountered on some of his abductions. You know, there were humanoid extraterrestrials and deceased human beings. So, yeah.
Whitley Strieber, before she died, he was talking about experiencers were saying that they encountered dead relatives often, you know, on board ship, and so something was going on there. And I was going to say, and then as a child, like not so much lately, but through my teens and 20s, I would see my deceased like grandmother and her mother, grandmother and great grandmother, and there was a man that appeared, and these were people that were dead, and they appeared to have the ability to manifest themselves, to show themselves. Now the man who I did not recognize, wasn't a relative that was in the house that I grew up in, could only manifest his head, and he had a beard, and he looked like he was from the 1800s or something, dressed something in the 1800s. But my grandmother was able to show her full form, and so I wonder if there's a correlation with that. So the surviving death, the ability for the discarnates themselves to, you know, have such a strong desire to contact and reach between the dimensions. And so Whitley Strieber says he has communication with Anne, who crossed over a few years back.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you know, it's interesting. It's just like Raymond Moody, who's doing contacting the dead over these great big vats of oil and stuff, say that the person who's seeking a relative, just like you said, sometimes don't get the relative they ask for. They get somebody who they'd rather not have gotten even.
Right.
Yeah, a walk-in or whatever you call it. And Keene describes some seances where the hands actually materialized and they had them dipped in paraffin wax, and there's no way that this could be replicated. And apparently these are in a museum somewhere in France. So I'm about to retire in 2 weeks, and I'd love to, you know, take some time and go to some of these places where some of these artifacts are allegedly exist and see them for myself.
You know, I think this actually happened to you in a way when you had your death and revival experience, that you died, and your the self that goes beyond your physical body was visible to you in your consciousness. I think it's very similar.
Yeah, it seems like all of our, how Dr. Stephen Greer says, the number of minds in the universe is one. Apparently, without our bodies, we're all connected into something akin to the computing cloud. It's a field of energy, but it can also differentiate itself. For example, I just lost a dog that was really dear to me in January, and I hope to see it again the next time I have a chance to transition. But my concept of this is that the entity itself is dissolved or absorbed into, you know, what Wilcock would call the source field, but it's able to resonate with your own mind and your own spirit and transfigure a portion of itself into that little creature if it's useful for you to see it. So we exist in a unified consciousness, and at the same time, it can also differentiate itself for various purposes based on mental resonance. And that's kind of the way that I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
You know, whether or not there's an ethereal Melanie, you know, my little Yorkie, you know, off in some other dimension or not, as is uncertain. But I am certain that I will see her again the next transition period that I have, which I'm greatly looking forward to. I'd like to see all the animals that I was attached to in this world. And I think right now they exist on this cloud function. And then when I get there, because my desire and my mind and spirit is seeking these creatures, that the source field will kind of transmogrify itself, you know, for me into these little creatures, and I can have a great reunion. And the same thing with deceased relatives. And there does seem to be sort of a law of attraction going on in this physical world. You can always see that it exists. You know, you're always around people of like mind. And if you change your paradigm, all of a sudden there's people around you that are very, very similar in their thinking. And then the other channel kind of fades away. Well, as below, so above. Whenever you lose your body, you're going to be around beings that are on a similar level of advancement than you, that are learning the same lessons or have the same concept of what this universe really is. So there's probably a whole spectrum of groups of beings that are like-minded with one another, that have from low to high understanding of the true nature of the cosmos. So I'm trying, for the rest of the time that I have here, I'm trying to learn as much as I can and you know, increase my own resonance, so that when my body passes, I'm in the midst of you know, really interesting people. And even since this paradigm shift I had in August the 18th of 2009, when I had the near-death experience and I was opened up to the fantastic cosmological reality that surrounds us, I've attempted to kind of move my mind and my spirit in a positive direction. And it's hard because people have little glitches and little personality defects, you know, like, you know, I like getting into it on Facebook with people in politics. And I wonder if that's somehow a blockage, you know, to me, that I should only be putting out positive things. I should avoid little conflicts and arguments and all that. So who knows?
But if everything is harmony and oneness, you wouldn't have anything to learn, you know, to vibrate against and be the apparent other and learn. Sasha has a burning chair. Go ahead.
Well, it's just, I find it's an interesting exercise to, you know, you can remote view and put yourself through someone's television set and be in a room in Prague or something. But there's another kind of remote viewing where you remote view from a person's headspace, from their phenomenology. And so you can regress to, you can say, I would like to see the world from my father's perspective. And then when you do that, you say, I'd like to see the world from my father's my paternal grandfather's perspective. And you can do that in the past, but you could also say, I'd like to go to a future life where I'm inhabiting another body. And I would like to view my world and existence from that. And you know, you might think you're making it up, but where the hell is up anyhow?
And I'm going to add one more thing, and then we should bring on TJ, who just arrived. But what you were saying earlier was evoking this thought in my mind, you know, about the law of attraction and the animals that you're going to find and the deceased relatives and those people who come to you. That also is tied with what past lives or archetypes that we identify with. So in some way, we're continually changing the here, the past, and the future by, like you said, you were going to try to learn as much as you can and to increase your own resonance. So it's never too late to increase your own resonance and affect those changes across the entire continuum through what we call time and space and the totality
goes two
of
ways,
existence.
yeah.
It goes always, yeah. So with that, let's hold our thoughts for just a moment, take a breath, and say, hi, Theresa. TJ.
Yeah. Well, hello, everybody. I'm remote viewing in.
So TJ, what's the world look like from when you remote view from Janet's head? What does her world look like from your perspective?
You. It looks like you. You're her world. You're her world.
Yes.
Dr. Lessin, wonderful to have you. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. We have bad weather here. A little trouble getting in, but I'm here now. Russell Brinegar, wow. This is awesome, folks. Hey, Ahmad, thank you for being my producer, and for Janet and Sasha. This is awesome, guys. Wow. And it sounds like you guys were into a heavy, you know, cosmos connection kind of place in space. Are you doing like multi-dimensional remote viewing right now? What's up? What's up?
I was just suggesting that one of the ways to gain information about other timelines or about your own ancestral scripts is to remote view successively being in the headspace of each of your ancestors. So even though you don't know your great-great-great-great-grandmother, you could, by this method, get back there. And this is what I do when I study history. Or you could go to the future, or you could go to a parallel place. As long as you're thinking of astral projecting or remote viewing, you're free of your bodily constraints, I would suggest.
Well, that's interesting. Russell Brinegar, are you one of those kind of guys that, well, I remember some of your story, Russell, from a long time ago, like eons ago, and then when you came in here to be Russell Brinegar, but, you know, you're sort of one of those kind of guys. You do remote viewing, don't you?
No, I can't say that I've tried that at this point in time, nor have I exited my body and astral traveled. I'm very interested in the subject, and I'm interested in hearing stories and accounts and testimonies from people that do such things. I'm very fascinated by it. But outside of my near-death encounter and what that showed me, I really don't have a lot of experience exiting my body and astral traveling, but I'd love to learn to do that.
Well, when I left my body when I died, that really opened the door when I was in the second grade and then again later. So I just thought everybody did that, you know. But once when I was sick, I got caught in my brain. I was really sick as a child, and I never wanted to get caught back in the brain again. It was like riding a roller coaster with your eyes closed. I couldn't get out. I was so sick. So I've been very fortunate to have several levels of existence. But the remote viewing, I guess I spent a lot of time in the cosmos. I think this is rightfully named Cosmos Connection for that reason. But there are several levels, and I've been hypnotized too, where I came back in front of a huge audience in Biloxi, Mississippi, or Mobile. I forget which one, if I was in Alabama or Mobile. That's how much I don't remember. But at that time, a gentleman took me back, hypnotized me to show people how it was done. And I went back, and I still remember today sitting next to I was out in a cabin in the woods and went back and regressed and was sitting there. It's one of those on, you know, entertainment where you relax and your arms get lazy and your legs and all that. You know how you relax totally and listen to his voice. And I went back and I was a man. And everybody was laughing after I came out at me because I was like, what are y'all laughing at? And he said, well, you were a man, a big guy, and you kept wanting to know. I'd say, where's my boots? He said, where's your boots? I was only worried about my boots, but he asked where I was. I described where I was sitting. So, you know, going back, and you can be regressed through time and become another person. And out of body, I don't know, Sasha, you'd be better at that. Remote viewing to other people, is that sort of like being hypnotized and going backwards too into a past life?
Yeah, these are just a bunch of words that allow a person to have their own phenomenological experience. There's only one time that truly exists for anybody, which is right now, and the imagined past, the imagined future, or the remembered past exists right now. And so what I'm saying is that everybody is a fractal of everything else. It's a holographic universe, and that certain fractals or aspects of ourselves resonate according to our mission. And the mission is partly dictated by what seems to be an insult to consciousness, and that arouses us to action. And so from my perspective, everything's, I know no one's going to agree with this, but everything's perfectly the way it is, and it couldn't be any other way because that's how it is. But I know that's not what the main thrust of this show is.
Well, that's okay. Timeline. Go ahead, Janet.
I just wanted to catch up a little bit about what we were talking about so we can let Russell tell us a little bit more, because he was taking us down a wonderful road. We started talking about the Draco Reptilians and the Orion Greys, and they're in cahoots with the Dracos. And so anyway, we were talking about the different Urantia and the channeling and the readings, and we went through time to Nikola Tesla and the spirit radio, and how he was getting communication between the, you know, this realm and other realms and the dead. And then Russell was talking about Richard Dolan's interview where he said that these things are beyond his experience, so he's just going to leave it there and keep an open mind and don't shut out stories. Then we talked about Leslie Kane and Surviving Physical Death, a new book, and how mediumship that beings materialize from ectoplasm, and seance, they were hands, they materialize, they dip them in wax, and Russ wants to retire and travel to I guess it was France or
See the
Paris or
hands.
something, to see the hands. And then he said that Richard Greer said that the number of the minds in the universe is 1. And we exist in a unified consciousness field, that animals, that when they're deceased, they exist in a cloud form, and Russell hopes to be reunited with his deceased pets. I'll talk about deceased relatives and the law of attraction, and then Russell said he wants to learn as much as he can before he crosses over again with it, like he did with the near-death experience, because he wants to increase his own personal resonance. So that caught you up.
Wow.
What are we talking about?
Either took great
Yes.
or tracked him really, really well. My goodness, or both. I guess you do both since you're Dr. Lessin's wife. You're always good at both. So, wunderbar.
Yes.
That's wonderful, yes.
Didn't William Tompkins transition on the eclipse day?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, that was so sad. I was going to call him that day. I was going to call him all weekend, and I said, oh, no, I'll let him have this weekend. I'll call him on Monday. I was going to set up an interview, and then I wake up, and, so, you know, he died at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's like, well, I missed that window.
Yeah.
What an awesome way to go. I would love the transition on an eclipse day.
Maybe he planned it. Who knows? So tell us a little bit more about your book, Overlords of the Singularity. What is the singularity? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it an ugly thing?
We don't know things.
Or do we? Yeah. What is this?
The singularity is a projected period of time. The futurists like Ray Kurzweil, who originally wrote the book, The Singularity is Near, in 1996, where he was prepping everybody for the exponential growth in technology. We've been going by Moore's law, where, you know, integrated circuits double in capacity about once a year, and in general our technology doubles about once a year. But we're moving into a realm where we've never been before, that we know of anyway, where our technology increases exponentially, and when it starts spiking, expect some miraculous things that you thought were in the realm of magic when you were a child, you may actually see in your lifetime. In the realm of medical technology, being able to upload consciousness, developing what's called AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. That's human level artificial intelligence, into artificial superintelligence or sentient intelligence, where they're actually creating an artificial life form that has an identity of its own and is self-aware. We were talking earlier about an electronic invention coming that will allow the people who exist in three-dimensional reality, like we are, to actually communicate or interact or maybe travel to and from the discarnate realms. There may be an electronic physical invention that allows us to do that, which all post-singularity civilizations use routinely, and they're just sort of like waiting for us to catch up until we can, you know, join them with intergalactic travel in that way in hyperspace. But we had an interesting interview with Alfred Lambermont Weber, where he said that during the Jade Helm in 2015, the singularity had already occurred. And I've thought a lot about that since he said that. And if some of what Corey Goode and the other secret space program whistleblowers are saying is true, there are civilizations in our near proximity that are already post-singularity and have access to interdimensional and time travel and all kinds of things that we would just have the impulse to write off as fiction. But it hasn't occurred in the public domain that we're aware of as of yet. And that is the technological singularity that Kurzweil and Bostrom and other futurists are predicting, that sometime between 2045 and 2080 in our domain, the one that we are immersed into, excluding any breakaway civilizations, will achieve our technological singularity. And I keep thinking about the Amicizia group from 1956 to 1967. My suspicion are that they are still here and have a base under the Adriatic Sea. If you delve into, there's a lot of material that leads to that reality. And they are what the Urantia book would call midway creatures, where they're the precursors to the spiritual realms, or there's a realm called the Morantia realm that Urantia talks about quite a bit. That's kind of a crossing point between the physical world and the spiritual realm. And that's where the Emicisia group said that they were from, which is really interesting. And they seem to be benevolent enough to where there's benevolent entities that can at least appear to us as humanoid and interact with us just like we would talk to another person. Whether that's their true form or not, we don't know, but they're able to transmogrify themselves and communicate with us as if they are a fellow humanoid. I think they're monitoring our progress in this direction, and there are some dangers. The Amicisia group talked about the Weros, the Contraries, the CTRs that are an artificial race from Orion, where they worship technology and they have plans of their own. You know, as soon as we achieve a technological singularity, they may actually Borg a part of the human life wave that resonates at the lower frequencies to achieve some sort of artificial transhumanist immortality throughout the physical universe. Whereas the ones that resonate beyond a certain frequency may be the ones that go into this 4D shift, you know, with the solar flash that seems to be coming, and go into the next higher dimension if that's, you know, what that particular soul wants, and that's what they're ready for. So there's a lot of really interesting things that are soon to come to pass. I'm really curious to keep. Now, go ahead,
Russell. Let's put a bookmark right there.
Solar flash. Tell us about the solar flash.
Slow this down, and so we can kind of, you know, break it apart, slow it down. Because that was a wonderful download, but I couldn't even write that fast. It was much information. Let's break it down a little bit. Okay. So it's the solar. What do you mean by the solar
flash that's
coming? Yeah, you got to explain some of these things to us.
Well, apparently there's this thing called the precession of the equinox that happens every 25,920 years. Maybe just some machination that automatically happens throughout the universe. Wilcox's work is really good in this direction because this solar flash is predicted in multiple cultures. Like, for example, Zoroastrianism, they call it Fragiocureti, where the solar flash occurs. A lot of global warming is actually solar system wide. Mars right now is developing clouds at the equatorial region. Our moon, which is probably an artificial device, is developing a natrium atmosphere. A lot of the auroras on Jupiter and Saturn are energizing and being, you know, brighter than they normally are. And there's rings on the outer planets that weren't there before. So something is happening throughout the entire solar system. And Wilcock and other researchers are kind of looking to the end of this 25,920 year cycle that has to do with even punctuated equilibrium within the evolutionary process. And then it gets into the work of Harold Aston and Dr. William Tift, where he figured out that all the redshift values were in discrete diatonic units instead of representing speed and distance, which is the standard astronomical interpretation of the redshift. Dr. William Tift and others think that this is a dimensional shift. So when we look out there in Hubble and, you know, we see the redshift, we may be looking at evidence for a transmutation into higher dimensions, even within the same galaxy. So, for example, you know, in the 1950s, where, you know, beings like Valiant Thor and Orthon and these people that said they were from Venus, they might have been telling the truth. There could be an astral level of Venus or a dimensional shift of Venus where the 3D appears to be uninhabitable, and that's questionable in and of itself. Some of the radar images seem to detect artificial structures, even though the atmosphere.
Hold right there. Russell, you're great. We have to do 20 shows to get all this, but I just wanted to say that we had Olmec, who said that she came from Venus,
right,
and her realm was already in the other dimension. There was still some remaining in the third dimension. There was like one domed city, and some people said they've seen 7 domed city. So there was only a small part remaining in the third dimension, but she was actually in a 4th or 5th or higher dimensional realm when she and her uncle decided to come to the Earth. As they were traveling to the Earth, they manifested a 3D form for themselves, and then they landed in Tibet, where they have a training facility for people that are coming in from other dimensions. I want to give, let's go round table here. Let's take a little break here. Let TJ address some of the things we talked about, and then let Sasha, and then we'll come back to you, Russell.
Okay.
TJ, what would you like to say?
Wow. Well, that was, like you said, that was a lot to download. Which part do you want me to address, Janet? All of it?
Whatever bubbles to the top for you and resonates with you and like something you want to talk about.
I can only speak from experience. I've seen other dimensions outside of, spacecraft not of Earth origin, where I was standing at it and looking at it, and I know it was in my dimension. But being that I'm a student of multidimensional thought processing, it was hard for me to understand how I could see it expand when there was no expansion in 3D. So my husband and I had to conclude that it was another dimensional or portal opening, and the spacecraft couldn't explain it to me, or would not explain it. I don't know if it had authorization or not, because it was hard to understand in 3D when you're a student and you're learning how to do this. So I've seen that open up.
Tell me what you saw. Can we slow that down a little bit? What were you looking at? I'm confused. You were inside an intelligent spacecraft that was AI that had the ability to communicate, and you saw what? What did you see?
Well, when you walk into, like, through a wall, just like in a home, or you walk on a spacecraft, like a shuttle, and you're looking, you walk in, and then you look back outside, and then you look back inside, there's a wall there of something that you assume is the spacecraft. However, there was a way for it to change reality on the inside of it. And I've been in rooms like that, and I can only relate it to Disney World, where you walk into a room and they shift it, and then you're somewhere else. And I didn't understand that either. So that's all I had in a 3D world to relate to. However, I saw another room that, when I looked, it's like Gigi took on just the 21st, when we had the eclipse, on her camera, and she posted it on Facebook. There was a portal window open up. And she put 12 slides on, and there was a literal door open up in space when she was doing the photos of the sun. And she and I just know things like that happen. You can't explain it to yourself or other people. So when you're seeing it in 3D, I believe there's other existences that are here, just like when I'm taken on a spacecraft, which sounds totally ludicrous to me in this 3D world. But I have to keep an open mind that other things exist, because I've experienced it, and I'm still working.
Right.
I don't have the way to speak it in 3D world, English, or any other language for that matter, but I do have an understanding of it. So it's got to be another way of speaking and another level of existing, because when I've gone, well, Jen, you remember when I told them, they said I can only tell you something, because I asked, well, can I tell? And they're like, you can tell Janet. And that was strange to me, because it was like I was only being able to experience something that I had one witness, or you can tell Janet. So that was interesting to me. So there's something going on for the expansion, at least in my own mind, where I can go and experience something, bring it back to this existence in this world, and then try to explain it. I don't know if it's because they know I can't, or because not everyone gets to do it, but there is something going on, and I get to experience it in 3D. So maybe that's what Sasha's talking about. It's all going on anyway. So there's only, one. Maybe we're in other parallel universes. I don't know. I'm working on all that, So maybe that's what Russell's working on, and everybody's working on, because the time frame that my husband and I, when we'd leave planet, was a 15-minute differentiation. For every day off planet was one day there would be, we couldn't put back 15 minutes. In a day, but we'd be gone 2 weeks, and what would be literally on Earth 15 days. We'd be missing for 2 weeks. But when we came back,
so you were missing here, and people were reporting you missing. Like, who missed you?
Well, no, it was government. It was just in government experiments.
The government knew you were gone 2 weeks, but you were only
15 days, and would be only 15 minutes, and they just couldn't believe it. So it's just. We know things happen, but we don't know if it is how to explain it yet. So we're dealing with rationale, but we're dealing with the existence of time, place, And there was a word for it. It was like displacement, but it wasn't. It just was gone. And from what I understand with the people I was working with in these other places in space, they don't know either. And as brilliant and as old as they are, they just said we don't, or either they wouldn't tell us. I learned a lot of things was just not told. It didn't mean they didn't understand it. It meant we weren't going to know. So, but that's all I can really say. Yes, there's time and space displacement, and it can be in other dimensions. So I'm still working on that because I watched Gigi to walk away and come back in Florida in Gulf Breeze. And then I was literally taken up. And when I came back down, she'd been gone the time and walked down through a space portal, I guess one would say. Now, is that mine? I sound totally nuts, but I know that I wasn't here. And so the video was running and I wasn't there. So I'm working on all this because it's got to mean something. It has to mean something. Some of us are experiencing this for a reason. So I imagine Russell's studying it. I'm studying it. Dr. Lessin's studying it. You are. Even Ahmad with his paintings, he just keeps painting away. So keep painting that stuff, Ahmad, and put some dimensions in there. I don't know how to explain it.
Well, that's good. We'll pass the talking stick to Sasha. What would you like to say about anything you want to talk about?
Okay, yeah, it's about this. I understand Richard Dolan's desire to have documentary written on paper evidence from the government and so forth, especially in terms of how the government spends its money, because that's one way to find out. So I really understand that. But from my perspective, when there's a concurrence of witnesses, but not necessarily documents, it does have the advantage that you can cross-examine the witnesses and get further details and do all kinds of things. So I think that's another kind of evidence that I greatly value. And so as I started doing my research, I realized there was two main sources. There was the old written sources, and Zechariah Sitchin translated a lot of those for us, and most of it's just about financial transactions and records, but there was a lot of real information too. And then there's the stories that we get from people that have direct eyewitness accounts, personal accounts of interaction with extraterrestrials that were working in other areas besides the Sumerian area. And the most outstanding for me is Stuart Swerdlow, and his account basically seems to dovetail with this Urantia book. And something has happened to me every time I start to read the damn thing, I fog out. So Russell, could you give us a short, what does the Urantia book say about the migration of peoples from the Lyran group and their reactions with the Dracos and how we got to this day? What does the Urantia book say about that?
Well, the Urantia book doesn't mention specifically anything about the Draco or Lyra, but it paints a much larger picture of the cosmos. And even if it's pure science fiction, it's worth listening to. I've got 100 hours of it from audible.com, and it's a wonderful thing to listen to. There's a variety of different narrators, some female, some male, different types of voices. And it's just wonderful to open your mind. I love just sitting in a lounge chair on a nice cloudy day and listening to the Urantia book. But it's divided into three sections. The first is it builds a picture of the cosmos according to this unknown channel back in 1932 that Dr. William Sadler, who was a total skeptic of anything paranormal, a client of his, her husband would go into trance and say some things that she was very bewildered about. So he started taking dictation, and it eventually turned into the Urantia papers, which was published in 1955. But according to the Urantia book, our physical universe is the universe of Nebadon, and it is one of many universes in something called a super universe, which is referred to as Orvonton. And then Orvonton is one of 7 super universes that circles around a realm known as Havona within the center of infinity, and it's called the Isle of Paradise, where the Father God lives. So it's a really expansive cosmology. And in the midst of all these different sections, it has over 100 different types of specific creatures that it talks about. I've got a little 3x5 notebook, and I'm writing them down off the internet because a lot of them, like the midway creatures, corresponds to other UFO material that I've come across. So I want to try to correlate some of the material that's from the Urantia book with other ufological sources, but it's very much worth reading. The section on the life and times of Jesus is just astounding. I mean, for somebody to have made that up, they would have had to spend a lifetime, because they mention proper surnames, crossroads, places, cities, the societal condition, the weather. They'd really have to be a researcher of a great magnitude to have sat down and concocted this story. It rings to me of somebody that's dictating something they know to a person that's in a position to write it down. So the interesting thing about the Urantia book is Jimi Hendrix always carried a copy. Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead always had a copy. And Elvis Presley, it was his famous book, favorite book. He always had a copy of the Urantia book in his dressing room. So all of these artist type personalities are attracted to the material. And it's one of those things that you just want to sit down and read or listen to with an open mind and see if it correlates with anything else that you've come across. But it's very valuable. And then when I get done with my research on the Urantia, I want to move into the Oahspe Bible, which was written by a dentist back in the 30s or 40s. I think his name was Newman. And he's got an entire hieroglyphic language in there that's been examined by Orientalists, and they said that there's just no way that anybody could make this up. So there is material that's being channeled from somewhere into certain people's brains that is pretty fantastical stuff, and it's nice. But the cosmology that's outlined in the Urantia book is very thought-provoking. It's got its critics, because some of the science that it talks about were concepts that were common in the 20s and 30s that we've since changed our paradigm on. But it also says things that there's no way to prove. Like, for example, we perceive the universe expanding right now. And according to the Urantia book, every couple billion years, the universe respirates. So it expands and contracts, but stays in a continual, eternal state of equilibrium. And there are scientists like Dr. Ron Joseph that have concluded the same thing, that the universe respirates, it's an eternal phenomena, and that there was no Big Bang. So you just got to keep open. The science is coming down the pike, and it's really an eye opener. If you've looked at the latest Ancient Alien series, they're really getting into some interesting stuff with the reincarnation, which the Urantia book talks about. But I didn't know this, but there's several major universities that have entire departments dedicated to the subject of reincarnation. And the hard evidence is coming in with children talking about other lives, and their parents check it out and all the details check out, that reincarnation is becoming more of a scientific fact than something that one has to believe or disbelieve in. And of course, Christianity taught reincarnation until Justinian extracted it in the 5th century. So there's a lot of things about our existence here and about human spirituality that we just don't have a good grasp on. And I'm open to, any material that resonates with me. I want to go back to something TJ said, if it's okay. She talked about displacement. And there's a fiction author, Philip K. Dick, and his wife Tessa has helped Andrew Colvin combine a lot of John Keel's old writings into an audible version. And she talks about a phenomenon called fire bright that used to come into their windows, about a 2-inch ball of plasma-like energy that flitted around like a moth. And I think one of the aspects of reality that we haven't really delved into is this idea of hyperspatiality, where there might be an actual 2-inch diameter orb to our perception come into your home and extract your consciousness into a huge ship, what looks like a huge ship once you get inside. And they can take you on an experience that may last, according to your perceptions, 2 weeks, 2 months, or whatever, and then reinsert you right back at the instant they took you, to where an outside observer wouldn't have even observed you going anywhere. So there's all kinds of things going on in that realm that to our perceptive apparatus just ain't so, but they are so. And also hyperacceleration. I forget who it was, but in Colorado, some guy captured on film at noon every day for an entire week this little craft that came in that had fire coming out the end of it. They've had experts examine the film footage, and it's not a bug. It's not anything that you could rule out. And it indicates to me that there are craft in our skies that we can't see, not because they're invisible, but they're just traveling too fast. You know, they're actually in a hyper accelerated state, or traveling in bundles of plank time or something, to where they're invisible to our eyes, but they're as real as rain.
Russell, I've got to ask you this. Tessa is a friend of mine and has come on many of my shows, but I don't remember telling her about my experience with a plasma ball.
No, she was talking about Philip and hers experience.
I didn't know that.
She goes into some detail in Andrew Colvin's compilations of John Keel's writings, The Flying Saucer to the Center of Your Mind. There's another one, The Outer Limits of the Twilight Zone. And Tessa Dick actually, has like a foreword onto one of the Audible versions.
Yeah, I put a deal in UFO Digest about one that came in, and I asked my husband if he could see it, but it did all these mathematical equations, super infinity, all kind of deals on the wall. It was teaching me, and it was amazing to me. And thank God I put it in writing, because I was on the computer when it happened, because it's hard for me to believe some of the things that happened to me. But fortunately, I was writing an article for UFO Digest at the time. And I talked to Dirk right before he died about it. But it's recorded. I don't know how else to do this when people want proof when it's happening to you, and there is no proof. You're the only one. I mean, my husband had walked in the front door, but I was just downloading all this data it was giving to me. And I looked out the window. I looked, there was no way to get the light or anything. I was like, how the heck did this come in? And I've talked about it before. So these plasma balls were all I could compare it to was a crop circle. That it came in and it was teaching me things on the wall, like a light show.
Listening to Revolution Radio.
It is no secret that the so-called mainstream media is best described as controlled propaganda. Countless news stories are either totally ignored or spun with half-truths, and because of this, essential facts and vital information are often compromised. Join Dr. Ott every Friday night on Studio B at 10 p.m. Eastern and learn why The Story Behind the Story was nominated for a Peabody Award in its second year of producing unparalleled broadcasting excellence in 1997. That is, if you really care about learning the truth.
Tune in to The Divine Truth every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time with Taj, Sarah Adams, and Nissa Norton. We present a genuine and authentic show with discussions and interviews with the people that matter in the alternative community. We ask the questions that nobody else will ask, the greatest minds of the alternative community every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com in Studio A. We talk about everything from the Illuminati to the secret space program, multi-dimensional warfare, aliens and UFOs, mind control, and sacred hidden knowledge. The Divine Truth, exposing the truth without the fear, every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Revolution Radio.
Oscar's freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
Your body's filling with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. Your heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are too weak to move.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting the danger. Unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio.
Hey everyone, it's Barbara Jean Lindsay, the Cosmic Oracle. If you have questions about your past lives or future plans, need answers from the cosmos about your love life or career, or just want to keep your finger on the pulse of the planet, check out my show, The Cosmic Oracle, here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
The Secret Society Revealed. With your host, Joseph Atwell, author of Caesar's Messiah, The Roman Conspiracy to Invent Jesus, and Shakespeare's Secret Messiah, the groundbreaking discoveries that gives us a new understanding of how governments and elites use mind control to manipulate their subjects. Join Mr. Atwell as he lifts the veils of deceptions of our modern world. Mondays, 12 noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time on Revolution Radio.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome back to Cosmos Connection with everybody. We got a lot of hosts today. We have Janet Carroll Lessin, a mad painter, Dr. Sasha Lessin, and we have as guest Russell Brinegar. And I am TJ Morris, also known as TJ Thurman Morris, for you guys that keep up with us on UFO Digest, and Theresa J. But you know what? Russell Brinegar is just amazing, absolutely amazing. And Sasha Lessin and Janet Carroll Lessin has a radio show on actually tomorrow night called The Sacred Matrix, and we're going to make sure everybody gets a chance to talk about their shows here, and we do that right now because we're right on the break. I mean, we got to tell you, we appreciate your support. We're the #1 listener supported radio network as far as I know in the world, so please send in your little donations if you don't mind, and we are at freedomslips.com, so please feel free to send us your PayPal connections with, as much as you can afford to help keep us here. Janet Carroll Lessin, you want to tell us about the Sacred Matrix and Tuesdays as well?
Well, we're going to be having Tony Rodriguez tomorrow, and we broadcast from 8 to 10 Eastern, and Dr. Lessin is my co-host tomorrow. So that's going to be a really great show, to quote the late, great Ed Sullivan. And beginning in, I think it's September 12th or something like that, we're going to be doing this Sacred Matrix from 10 to 12 on Tuesdays. That'll be Theresa J. Morris and Janet Kira Lessin and guests and topics. And so if you want to be on our shows, contact me at aquarianradio@gmail.com, AQUARIAN radio@gmail.com, and tell us what your topics are. And of course, Russell, he knows everything. He's like blowing my mind. And when you're ready back to the show, what I have on my wish list for the second hour here is to go back to this reincarnation issue. I've got a couple questions. What did you want to say, Sash?
Yeah.
Well, I hear Russell talk. I already know what I know, but if I shut up, I can listen things and learn things.
From Russell. He's very brilliant researcher, Russell. You were very advanced when we, last had you on, but you have come so far. You're like leaving us all behind. So we had to slow you down so we can get what you're saying and decipher it for the rest of the world.
Let's let a Mad Painter talk about real quick his show, and then we're going to get on with the Russell Brinegar show because he knows so much. So Mad Painter, you're going to be on in the morning for roughly 4 hours roundtable. Tell us a little bit about your show and then your
11 to 3, and it's a call-in show, and we'll talk about any subject you want to talk about.
And how do they reach you tomorrow?
A Mad Painter on Skype, or they call my number. I'll post it in the chat room, and I'll say it out on air.
And it's on Studio B?
Studio A.
Oh, you're on Studio A. Okay, folks, A, B, we've got 2 channels, so that's in the morning. So please show up and support a Mad Painter. And also Monday night with Mark Eddy, is that it? Or what night?
Yeah, that's Monday nights at 10 o'clock, open canvas, and we mainly keep that to some sort of history base.
Okay, so that's open canvas, Monday nights, 10 to 12, with a Mad Painter, Thomas Becker, well-known poet and author, as well as Mark Eddy, well-known historian, and he also books a lot of people with the History Channel, et cetera, Ancient Aliens, and Mark's been around and helped Mad for quite a while now. So, and then I guess Janet and I will be doing Tuesday night. I think we're going to call that Tuesday Ascension Center, 10 to 12 in the evening, same time Eastern. So, all right. Well, thank you.
And I'll be hanging in the background of that one, too.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
Hey, wonderful. You wouldn't believe this, but Thomas Becker, a Mad Painter, is our producer for Janet and I. So we're just a trio threesome, and Sasha Lessin is also listed on our group of co-hosting as well. So sometimes he'll come and bring his wonderful intelligence. I just love Sasha Lessin. Dr. Lessin, we should say, and Janet, and I got to meet them in Mobile, May 6th, 7th, and 8th. It was a wonderful time, and gosh, I can't wait to see what all we're going to co-create. All right, let's get back. So Janet, back to you, but Russell, I think Janet wants you to get going on reincarnation. Do you need to?
I have a question on reincarnation. Okay, a couple things. I took a little bit of notes here, but so. Sometimes, we do regressions, and sometimes we get 3 or 4 Lincolns or Jesus Christ or people that are claiming to be famous people. And I'm not saying they are or not, and I don't judge what they're saying. We just listen to their story and we find a relevance to their own personal growth and healing. But you said that they're bringing that in and doing research. How are they resolving the that information? That there's many people that kind of hone in on the same incarnation, and then once you say what you want to say, I have a possible explanation, but go ahead.
Okay, well,
what do you think about it?
Personally, I would not know how to account for multiple people claiming to be the same person in the past. And with hypnotic regression, I don't know enough about hypnotic regression to really speak on it, but it seems like there are things coming through in those sessions that could possibly be real, and then other stuff that may be fabrications of a person's imagination. That's the way I'm looking at it right now. My opinion may change, when I do a little bit more research into the actual subject of hypnotic regression. But where these the evidence for reincarnation is coming, and what the universities are focused on, are cases. There's a famous case in India, and there's another one, American case, a young boy named James, who was a World War II fighter pilot that died. And even at a very young age, he was drawing pictures of Corsairs and was saying that they had trouble bearing to the left going down the runway, and things that he couldn't possibly know or understand. And his parents were fundamentalist Christians. They weren't having any of this reincarnation stuff because they didn't believe in it. But with trepidation, they took their child's story seriously and started looking into it, found out that he was on this one vessel called Natoma, and they got on the internet and found a Natoma alumni group, and found out that the entire story checked out. But there's multiple cases they're finding out of children that are saying, that they were these other people and having trauma from that lifetime, or birthmarks related to an injury that they had in that lifetime, and then finding out that their stories check out. So there is a growing body of evidence for the factual occurrence of reincarnation. And, they're trying to rule out all the alternative explanations, like you're tapping into an ancestor's psyche somehow. It wasn't really you, it was this other person. And one by one, they can logically rule these out. And they're coming to the conclusion at the universities that this child James and the Indian example were, in fact, these people from the past. So reincarnation may actually come into the mainstream pretty soon, to where it's just something we all accept that happens. And there's also a story in the raw material. Yeah.
Oh, Sasha wanted to add something.
Well, it's just that's just one of my fields that I'm working on. That it's easy to think of for me to think of the 5 people saying they're Lincoln, and they may well be accessing different subpersonalities of Lincoln. And so when I regress people in their subpersonalities, they get totally different past lives. And what we find in psychotherapy is there's a resonance at all times. So, for example, right now I'm having a resonance with you, Russell, and it would resonate with something with probably the way I related to my father in my childhood, and would resonate with some paternal son relationship in my past life imaging, and so forth, and all the way to my relationship with the singularity in me. And so that in psychotherapy, we don't make value judgments as to the ontological status of a person's symboling. And we find it's all valid if you don't crush it. And it can all lead to insights and wider choices. That's my opinion.
Right. I just wanted to add that the research by the Dr. Michael Newton Institute, where they have regressed, I think about 30 or 40,000 people from many cultures all over the planet, and many different hypnotherapists doing regressions, and they would all report back to the Institute their findings of the results. And what they found is that souls, when they're very advanced souls, they're older souls, they've been through thousands of incarnations or hundreds, and they've mastered the ability to send threads of their consciousness down into more than one person at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if that's part of your research, but I highly recommend the Dr. Michael Newton Institute. And also there's information in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth that he was the thrice-born Hermes. And he was an old soul and a master. So the ability to send your consciousness down into different bodies simultaneously, to have these multiple experiences. And one of the things I got in one of my downloads was that the gods of ancient times, like Enki and Ninmah and all these different people, to accelerate consciousness, the ones that are for the light forces of light and goodness, to accelerate consciousness, have learned how to thread their consciousness, or send their threads of consciousness down into many forms, in hopes that it's kind of like sending out your seeds in hopes that more than one wake up to help accelerate this process for all of humanity. Go ahead, Sasha.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to finish the little part that I was saying. A fellow named Stevenson was taking these Indian children from India who had said, I'm from another village. They start describing the village, a place they'd never been, far away. And he would actually bring them back. And he found, yes, indeed, that they did belong there too. And I myself have actually witnessed in holotropic breath work, a person speaking a language that he didn't know. They record it. We look it up later. It turns out to be ancient Japanese. And I was with Stan Groff, my teacher, who kept working with this fellow who was obsessed with a past life where he was a Spanish priest in the galleons that were invading England, and of course the Spanish were defeated, and this guy made it to shore, and he hid his signet ring in this cave. And so this fellow, Stan's client, was obsessed with going back to England, and finally went there, and he was driven to find that cave, and he found it, and there was the signet ring. And then there's a famous case of Bridie Murphy, who remembered all these artifacts that were in in ancient Ireland. But it turns out, as a child, she had visited the Chicago Expo, where they had a exposition of ancient Irish domestic artifacts. And so that's what we have to watch out for, this false memory syndrome, where people actually are remembering something, but it isn't something that they directly experienced. Helen Keller remembered it's called cryptomnesia, wrote an entire book, and it turns out it was word for word something someone had read to her when she was a child.
It's amazing. In Titus Livy's writing, they refer to the Sibylline prophecies quite a bit. Apparently that was a huge part of their culture back then. They would go on portents like lightning striking at the temple of Jupiter, or a goat reported to have spoken, or a baby born with a deformity. And then they would refer to the Sibylline books, as to where to go from there. And it usually had to do with some village they were invading or something. It's like one war after another. But that's one thing I also want to look into is Sybil, the Sibylline material, because apparently she come up with some really interesting stuff. But what you just said reminds me of how linear we like to think. And if something doesn't make sense to us, like the multiple people reporting that they were Abraham Lincoln, what you said, Dr. Sasha Lessin, was really interesting, that they might be tapping into sub-personalities, and all of them could potentially be reporting truth with a different aspect of Lincoln's psyche. I mean, who knows? We just we're just learning how to think about this reality, and we got to avoid the linear type thinking that we do. We impulsively say, well, only one of them could be telling the truth, and that's not necessarily so. In my own case, since I was a child and I was able to pick up a pencil, I've driven little scribbles, and looking back into them, it was Islamic architecture with the points and on all the hallways and the doorways and everything. And
wow.
Ever since I was a child, I've related to, I've always been interested in camels, and, I scribbled the Islamic architecture. And when I was really young, I imagined as a child that I had been Muslim. I was really attracted to Sinbad and, all the Islamic oriented tales. And I personally think that at one point in time, I was a Muslim in the past, and we had camels, and I had 3 wives, and we sold tapestries and nuts along a trade route. And I just have like little fragments of memories of this former life. But this has been with me since childhood, and it's never gone away. It's just been a part of my psyche that I at least imagine myself in that role.
That's funny. I have one of those memories too, with it's not really a Sinbad, but I feel like I know what you're talking about, with a secret wall and back in the day, and camels and all of that. I don't know what time frame that was, but I had those from the time I was little too, and I could talk about them and point to them. But where do those memories come from, right? But you feel I love the magic carpet stories. It's when you're a child and you're looking at all that, camels and the people, and I always felt like I'd lived there before when I was a child. It was like looking at home.
It's funny because as we're talking, I'm looking in my room here, and I've got a pair of those pointy genie shoes, and one of the Sultan's hats, and I've always been attracted to that. Open Sesame. I remember playing Open Sesame when I was a kid, But the raw material has an interesting thing to say about in between lifetimes about a particular abduction of Charles Hickson back in 1973, the Pascagoula abduction. And apparently, according to this entity, Ra, that came through Carl Ruckert in the 80s, he had agreed upon this experience with some beings from Sirius prior to this incarnation because they wanted to learn about human war. And I guess he was a veteran. And during that abduction experience, they scanned his mind for all the emotions and trauma and everything that he had experienced in wartime. So that may be a possible purpose of that abduction.
That's interesting. Well, Janet, has Dr. Lessin ever heard that part of the command and Andromeda and all that with me before? No? I don't even know.
No, go ahead and tell us.
No,
what would you like to share?
Russell, have you heard of that? Because it sort of fits with what we're talking about. But
no, go ahead. Tell us.
I'm not sure. It's not a past life because it's in this reality. So it's a lot of past lives that because the history of who I am when I've died and came back and died and came back in this lifetime allowed me to remember a lot, and I'm putting it together for me. But this galaxy, when I learned about various universes and for firsthand, and with these beings that come and go from this other galaxy and this other universe. But when they found us by accident, this is in my reality in this life. You know, I'm 65 now, but in my 30s. And since the time I was born, and my uncle worked in Los Alamos, okay? And then I went to White Sands in the 2nd grade and got, willed myself there after having hepatitis and had died. So when we come back, we may have some reincarnation issues. But apparently I knew of some being very, very old soul for many, 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 many lifetimes. And so these beings, from what I understand, they say they knew us before we were born and meant it. So it was hard to understand all this. So I've got this huge book I need to write. But inside of that is the fact that they taught me about other universes. I believe, how I was just thinking about that today, how they all blend together, and it's like they meet, and it's like if you ever seen these two big round toilet tissue things that roll out in the bathroom, and they'll come in the middle, and that's the brain, BRANE, between the universes. And so they taught me about all of these things. I'm trying to find ways to explain it to this, and I did it for years. I worked with physics and wrote books and helped people and had somebody in China put my name in a book and the dot theory and how this all works for years, and I quit. But right now,
so you're saying it's like the corpus callosum that joins the right and left hemispheres of the human brain.
Yes, but it's called BRANE, and there's this thin layer between universes. But yeah, exactly. We're sort of a continuation of that. And they have, that's important because the universes are separate by this layer, and they can, it's like a reality or a resonance or a vibration off of those. And I remember studying all this, and it wasn't here, Russell. It was in a command, what Janet and I call a command ship, but we call it Janet, for lack of better words, calls it the secret space program. But but since I'm working with beings, we call it the UFO secret space. We have a little website, a little Facebook thing on it, but we're starting to bring people together. But this stuff that I got, I haven't heard anybody else talk about it. So I'm wondering if that's part of this me being here in this era, because I believe somehow we all connect the dots again. But this ship and these people, they said that they found us by accident, but that we've obviously been here for quite some time. And they're the ones that worked with Tom and I, and they were also the ones working in this lifetime, as far as I know, when I was working for my husband and I working during the Reagan era, 80 to 93. And Reagan wanted to know about it. He had seen a spacecraft. So certain things fit together. And this show is no accident. And it was so I could start sort of helping drop some information here and there so we could finally start finding out who's really interested in expanding universally and expanding what we call the ascension age, which is, like you said, every 2,000, 500?
25,920.
Yeah, so I feel like that's important. But these beings up there, they were as real as you or I. And they just are amazed. They didn't understand why we couldn't use more of our imagination, and they don't understand why we war. And they taught me about how we work together with other, species, and that we're various groups of species blended together from what they can study. And they even have a research group that's not supposed to take people, but they do, and they put them back. But I never heard, they never discussed any of these draconian or any things that any kind of the knowledge we have here. I got it firsthand, and it was strictly, beings that have been thousands and thousands of years old. Now, they did tell me about, and my husband too, monitoring World War II. They were here then, and how they came and went. And my husband met some of the people that were. It doesn't make sense to us. That's why even if I write it, I'm like, how am I going to make all this make sense? But some of the people, because they live so long, even though they're humans and look like us, they come and go. They come down here and they work and they go back. And I'm hoping that's what happened to my husband and what happens to me. So it's sort of like knowing that you're an immortal soul, and you come down here and you work in flesh and you go back up there, and it's a choice. And some of them work in other countries. You can choose your location and your accent and what you'll be wearing and all of that. They've got an explanation for everything that we do down here. But they started monitoring us a long, long, long time ago. But the one thing that we're most interested in is how Tom and I would perceive and imagine and work out our own solutions. That just amazed them. They have their own military. They have their own communication. They have things that look like cows, but they're not cows. They're similar to cows. They eat meat. They're not just vegetarians. There's a whole world out there, a whole other universe, of people. And I think that's sort of what Janet wants me to bring. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, TJ, I'm fascinated. You were saying that they taught you how to cooperate, how they get along. How many different species were there? And do you have this information? Because we could put this in a book form or some kind of show and teach humanity how you get along with species that are not from the same planet or same origin.
Well, yeah.
Do you have any of that information?
Well, yeah, they do. Tom and I. Well, Tom and I started at 28 there, that were working in that particular time frame. But by the time, if you remember, Tom and I were trying to keep up with what the once humans spoke about, and it's in one of my books, 68 or 69. But it's all out there in Google and in books I've written and the history, and it's all out there, and it's cross-referenced with humans.
Let's be here now, because we can't find that stuff. It's just, we can't even find half of it. You and I can't even find half of it because we've had computer crashes and stuff.
Start with the top 5.
Start with, how did they... Okay, you said a couple things that really stuck in my mind. You said that they taught you, they cooperate, and they live so long, and they work and go back. They come here, they choose their location. But they basically cooperate, and they monitor humanity, and they know how to get along.
Yeah.
And so what's their secret? They taught you this. What did they teach you about getting along?
But aren't there wars in space?
They have an alliance universally with universe to universe, and then all those that are under the commands. But from what I understand, where we are, this is off limits, and they're not supposed to bother this because we're young. We're very young conglomeration or group of DNA and the 23 chromosomes, and so it was my understanding that when they found us, that was prior to the mixture of, I guess you'd say, the races, maybe the Anunnaki and the Bible story. They found us before that, from what I understand. And so the race, so then, as far as...
Since our realm, and we're, mixed with the Anunnaki, and they have a violent past, and so there's part of existence in the continuum and human being type species, humanoid species that are violent and warlike, but these are humanoid species, and they don't seem to have the violent DNA.
No, those
What
were
was
the
their-
ones we worked with. They were so thousands of years old. They'd inbred. They did not like the warring factor. The wars. My daughter understands it better than I do. She's younger than I do, but that's why we're here, genetic and working on
So
DNA.
how does this said on how you do this? He said
Well,
they
they bred it out. They bred it out among all the races. But then they found out from that other universe where they know if they come and go, that Worf-looking group, they were shocked because they went over and on one of the worlds they did what we called rape and pillage. They go in, it was the gray colony, the little bitty grays. They're very highly intelligent. They're very sensitive, and so there's several different types, and they're not bad. They just, when they went back to take them from working with this group in this particular command, and I call it the Andromeda because that was the group I was assigned to, the quadrant of this particular universe. And so when they went back to take them to deliver them, their world was ransacked. There's nothing to take them back to. All the people were gone, and it was like Mars. So it was like they couldn't take them back. So that became the education we had, Tom and I. And that's when they changed the reality for Tom and I, that Tom had to start teaching that group that didn't know how to fight. They took him and he had to teach women and men both they didn't know how to fight. They didn't know how to feel. They didn't have the emotion. They didn't have the warring gene. So it's been bred back into this particular planet, the people, because these beings. So now they had to know. They had the alliance and the beings from the Illyrian and the Anu. That, from what I understand, that's the highest group I was allowed to know about. Is it Illyrians? Isn't that it, Sasha? Illyrians?
Illyrians, yeah.
Yeah, that's the highest group we were told about, and they were the ones that they're even older than them. These were the ones that went up to the Supreme High Council for all the universes. So,
TJ, one of the things that Russell, he'll tell us more about it, has suggested is that maybe they've already completed their genetic experiment, and the hybrids that have been placed among us, or enough of us are hybrid enough that the transition has already been made, and we and the Greys are one. Could you say some more about that, Russell?
Well, yeah, Dr. David Jacobs has been studying this for about 50 years, and he noticed that the narratives of the abductions have changed over time. At first they were being picked up like Betty and Barney Hill, and the medical experimentation and different things like that, and then the taking of sperm and ova, and then it moved into holding hybrid children or watching films and seeing if you could tell which were the aliens and which looked human. And the most recent version of his abduction narratives is people being abducted into apartments and showing how teaching hybrid teenagers how to arrange the furniture in their living room. I mean, it's a continuity of narration that's cross-cultural, and doesn't seem to be a product of the United States and our mythos or science fiction or anything. He's worked with people from other countries and other cultures, and they're all saying the same thing. But he sort of has a kind of a foreboding feeling about it, whereas I really don't. I think that the upgrade has already been done. If you think about it, starting in about 1961 with those original abductions, you heard about the cattle mutilations. They were coincided, and then all of a sudden it just sort of stopped. You didn't hear so much about the abduction experiences, and the cattle mutilations sort of ceased. And whatever they were doing with all that seems to be a project that had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think they've put enough of an upgrade into our population. The hybrids are obviously breeding with non-augmented humans. So it's just like putting a dye in a swimming pool, to where it permeates. And it seems to me, from everything I've read, that the purpose was to not have us destroy ourselves. The craft that showed up at the nuclear plants that shut down the Minuteman missiles, like Robert Solis's experiences, those were happening also simultaneously in Russia and in other countries. So it's a very real phenomena that these luminous orbs would show up at nuclear missile sites and demonstrate the power to shut them down. And I think they're concerned about us destroying the planet, because as soon as we let off that first nuclear bomb in 1945, all different kinds of configurations of craft showed up from all different kinds of places. And I think it's like throwing a firecracker in a book made of onion skin paper. Nuclear explosions actually adversely affect other dimensions. So they had an interest in what we were doing because we were affecting their domain, and they all flocked here to, see what they could do about it. And then when the abduction started, I mean, that was like taking a dog to a vet and setting it down and giving it shots and whatever it needed, so that the tremendous effort that's been made over the eons of terraforming this planet for intelligent life just didn't go up in a big ball of flames.
That makes sense. Well, I don't know where my narrative fits in, but Janet seems to think it's important, so I'm not sure, because she goes to these UFO things. I don't.
TJ, do you remember when you said...
Go ahead.
Yeah, let me tie it in a little bit, okay? Because I just got a lot of insights.
Hold that thought,
Russell. Okay, hold that. We'll come back to it. Okay, so you were saying that the violence was bred out of the beings that you interacted with, and from previous stories that there's 5 ships. So they have about 1 million personnel. The different ships are located outside of Mars. They're guarding a wormhole to protect this part of the universe, the solar system, from these beings that you called the Wharf beings, which ironically is the name that they call the Klingon Worf, played by Michael Dorn, and the second Next Generation series of Star Trek. So I know Gene Roddenberry had some information he was leaking to the public, and we often get our information from science fiction. So the Wharf beings would come through. They're extremely violent. They rape, pillage, plunder, and they would destroy planets. So when the little gray species went back to their planet, it was gone, totally devastated. So to help preserve other beings, other species, they look to humanity, which at one point we have a story where they allowed the draconian genetics to be introduced into the humanoid species. So we have this current species, which has the reptilian brain, and so that we have the ability to hit, we have the ability to kill, we have the ability to defend ourselves. But apparently the species that you dealt with on that craft outside of Mars did not have the ability. And I'll relate to our listeners a story that TJ told me earlier, that they asked Tom to hit somebody. He didn't want to. They said, no, you need to demonstrate how a human being can hit someone else. And he did. And then they asked him to kill somebody else, and he protested. But ultimately he showed them, yes, here's how you kill. And so that was something they needed to reintroduce to their people, and so that they would not be wiped out, because if you don't defend yourself. And that goes back to the original story, which Sasha knows better than I do, of how the Lyrans and the Dracos, the Lyrans were peaceful, and all of a sudden the Dracos came in. This is one of the origin stories that goes back millions, if not billions of years. And so we've had these ongoing wars, but apparently there's different parts of this vast series of universes that have peace, but we're always encountering, much to our chagrin and surprise often, this faction of existence in the grand continuum of all these universes that is so violent. It has no regard for consciousness, no regard for life. So it's like we continually encounter the opposite end of the polarity. Like it comes full circle, like the Ouroboros, the snake consuming its tail. And that point when we're consuming its tail shocks us every time, because we get so far out in our own reality of peace, love, and understanding that we just can't understand how someone has no regard for anybody else or anything else. Sasha.
Well, just the story that Swerdlow and others have, and it all comes down to the peacemakers or the Andromedans. But in any case, One of the first places that when the Dracos came from Thuban, their main island, and they came upon the Draco, the Lyran colonies, they blew up at Atlan, one of the Atlas, one of the first colonies, and eventually the Atlans were settled on Atlantis, and they went to war with the Dracos, and there was the Council of Hatona was called by the Andromedans to try to stop this war because both Lemuria and Atlantis had been sunk in these wars, and the Greeks had broken away from Atlantis and so forth. So that they by the Council of Hatona, 12 humanoid species and 1 Draco species, a different reptilian than the Dracos because they had broken away from the Draco Empire, contributed to the genetics, and they made a basic human prototype for all the different ET groups, of which there were dozens on the Earth by the time this occurred. There were the Maldecans who had settled in the Gobi, as well as the Atlans who had settled on Atlantis. And so that the brainstem is what the Dracos, the reptilians, wanted for their particular genetics. And each of the groups had their particular genetics designed to overshadow the others. But the Dracos wanted the brainstem because they could easily do mind conditioning and take over that way. So that was their trip. And so it goes on and on. But that's a little of the background that people like Swerdlow have talked about. And it seems to be the same story that's coming in, that the Andromedans have been able to mediate peace in this solar system a few times.
Okay, Russell, you had a question?
Well, it's just I'm absorbing what Dr. Sasha Lessin just said. He's got a lot of interesting stuff there. But going back to what you said about the frustration that you feel of trying to explain some of your experiences, just a piece of information from my particular near-death experiences, I realized that we only have a very small portion of our totality of consciousness invested in this little physical life. There's other stuff that we're doing on other levels as we live this life. And it seems like the creatures that you are interacting with, or the beings that you're interacting with, do have a correlation from the Urantia book. It's a celestial being known as the Ancients of Days, which are basically overseers of the super universes. Our universe coexists with a multitude of other universes through this brain system in a larger structure that's referred to as the super universe. Well, they're the celestial beings known as the Ancients of Days. They are sort of the overseers of the super universe. But you may, as we speak, be doing all kinds of things on other dimensions and other planets and other universes that your conscious mind in this particular lifetime grapples with and has a very difficult time explaining. And I would just say to you as a friend, just don't worry about that aspect of it, because you're a multi-dimensional being that's connected with other realities, and what you're doing over here, you may have a difficult time explaining to anybody. So I'm really fascinated by your stories, by the way. I haven't really had a chance to listen to them like we're doing now, and they're very interesting to me.
Well, thank you. They just come out when they come out. But yeah, I definitely have another life. I have a parallel world I live in, and I have another reality where I'm actually, well, I don't know how to say this, but I mean, I'm very conscious that I'm here and I'm somewhere else always. So I'm very much.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
Same thing. I have another job at night. I come back and I've been working all night at my other job, and I describe where it is, the other city, and my desk and my apartment and everything. So we are multidimensional selves simultaneously existing in many realms, planets, dimensions, vibratory frequency, time zones. And at some point we become aware of some aspects of our multidimensionality, but there may be things that we're not aware of until we're past this avatar that we're currently in. There's limitations of this avatar, which, I understand they're in place so we can fully be present in this existence and, pay attention to what we need to do and accomplish. But if it was always bleeding through, we'd be considered insane and wouldn't be able to function and achieve anything. But we're here, and some of us, as we learn and grow and become, we understand that this is happening. We can hold space like a center and, dance with yet another aspect of our multidimensionality, our sub-personalities, and embrace it all, and hopefully you get a nice person like my husband that you can talk to about. If you can't talk about it, then you start to think, well, I'm crazy. But if you have friends and peers like Russell and the people here on the show, you can talk about this phenomenon, then you can start getting, sane and conscious, and you'll find other people, like the attraction.
I used to do channeling. You remember 20 or 30 years ago when I was teaching, and I didn't know, people were coming to me more and more and more until we created a huge spiritual community. And then Dr. Laura Sturgis was a friend of mine, and we did people synergistically involved, and then I did holodynamics, and she introduced me to a couple of professors, and then she regressed me back and gave the papers to the government because I'd had ET experiences, so it's getting to be a big thing. And then, she had me teaching people, and I'd take them to the planetarium, and I'd show them star clusters, and it was amazing. And then helping them to open their minds and do different things. So that was a wonderful time, and I hope somehow in the future I can create that again. But I missed that, but the government had another job for me to do, so I had to leave Hawaii and come back to the mainland. But Russell, I would like to do something in the future. I'm really planning it with Dr. Lessin and Janet, and of course Ahmed here on the radio, but more than radio, and I'm not sure what that's going to look like yet. But the woman that the government or whomever that recruited me here on the planet to work with it was a very powerful older lady. She had a young lady with her. She walked with a cane, and then of course I've been to Washington and all that, so we won't go there. But then when I was off planet, I also answered to a lady, and there was a council of 12, and the lady, and then for the Supreme High Council. So they were ancients, and the only time I was able to ask about God, they just said God has always been. So they won't go there, but they do let the various people that come and go from this planet that's involved with this mid-level of existence between universes and dimensions, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, I learned a lot there. I know a lot of things. Some of it's like Star Trek, and other things are, I don't know what you'd call it, but I learned about various species. But talking to them is so absolutely amazing. And there were days when Tom and I had to wait 3 days for the wormhole, or they have wormhole technology, of course, but you have to wait till it manifests different locations in the universe. So we would have to wait for the transmissions to go over to the Andromedan galaxy, and then from there that we would be in contact with the higher universes. I don't know how you want to call that, but there is communication allowed, not just from your soul level. You know how there's a level of people with ESP, and I've been fortunate enough to be around those and learn a lot of it. And then there's the level of existence that we do military, and protect the quadrant from these beings that aren't supposed to be in our universe, but we're supposed to have a 16-year window from that, from a wormhole, that if they come. So that's why they're up there patrolling, all the time. And then and they didn't, they just are. So I guess that's like the galaxy, or the guardians of the guardians of the galaxy.
Guardians of the galaxy.
And then,
the guardians of the galaxy.
Yeah.
Sasha's something to say.
I never found out about the flash.
What about the flash?
The solar flash.
Yeah, let's go back to that.
Well, the solar flash, Fragile Credi, according to Zoroastrian eschatology, it's a solar event that allegedly happens every 25,920 years, where the souls that resonate on a high enough frequency get to go on and be in the fourth dimensional reality, and then everybody else stays here or stays in the physical universe or is recycled somehow. And it sort of coordinates with an old contactee, he's deceased now, Richard Kinniger. He wrote a book called The Ultimate Frontier, and he talks of the progression of the life waves, where people who have achieved what he was calling mastership go on to the next level, and then everybody else is recycled back to a Stone Age existence. So Wilcock talks a lot about the solar flash, and he's expecting it imminently. Of course, he wrote the book Source Field Investigation and made specific reference to the year 2012. Well, 2012 came and went, so now they're thinking it's a window, between 2012 and 2080, somewhere in there, where this is supposed to happen. But there are anomalies going on within our solar system that indicate there is a science behind this solar flash where everything does seem to be heating up. It's not only heating up here on Earth, but on other planets as well. And so maybe, Zoroastrians were onto something.
Well,
isn't that the ascension? Isn't that just the ascension? TJ, back in the 80s, got the word ascension or something that you tell us how you got the ascension. You started talking about the ascension.
Oh yeah,
back in the 80s.
I got real connected to people before we had internet, and I was running a corporation, and I knew about the internet and the computers because I'd used them. Just forgot that they wasn't on the planet where I was using them, so that was a little embarrassing. But I tried walking up to something like a microwave and telling it to do something, and it doesn't do it. So that's interesting too. It's very embarrassing. So anyway, traveling has time traveling, I guess. But anyway, when I was over in Hawaii, lightning came and split a tree, and I got this Ascension and this logo, and I was like, what was that for? And they kept giving me the name Ascension. So these are those beings. I didn't know who to call them, so I just said, well, my father's Zeus, because I didn't know how to relate to all that. My name is Thurmond in this lifetime, so it was called Thor's Protection. So I was born with my father's Thurmond for Thor's protection name. So I just assumed God and Thor and all these people were real, okay? Because this stuff was happening to me. So they told me to do the Ascension Center, and I didn't even know what that was. So I didn't even know what the word ascension meant. But, apparently these lifetimes I've had coming and going and being taken up and all that, it serves a purpose, and that purpose is to keep going. And, I'm always asking for guidance, and I report in and I do my thing. So, but the Ascension Center was to be a time like the Ascension Age after 12/21/12, which I knew, and we were doing 11/11/87, and I remember Solara and all these people doing that. So I related it to that. But then when you're talking about the solar flash, that was after the, which we already had the rift, and a lot of that's true. But from what I got, because I get a bigger picture, and I get to see time, space, and the continuum, I guess you'd say, but I get to see it rolling in and out like these rolling things, and I can do time and space-time travel and working with people like the guy Anderson. And anyway, I was working with all these different people. They were chosen on the planets, or like Tesla, Einstein. They pick these beings and give them certain information. But back then, there wasn't any people. So some rich people in California were trying to find out who was getting all this information. So I started using channeling. But the Ascension became a reality, and I've got the connection for the books and the colors, and they made it dumbed down for babies. Okay, back to how they brought in the Eastern Western philosophy and taught the chakra system, and the Ascension became the raising of the energy and teaching you how to use your nervous system, and that our nervous system is our other brain, and it's like after 7 hours from the time we conceive, and that is the reality. So I was supposed to teach all this. So I thought that when 12/21/12 got here was the window, and then I learned it was going to be 2020 after the solar flash. So the Ascension Age is supposed to be now, and then I'm supposed to be teaching all this stuff. So, but so is everybody else. So I started teaching it years ago, and it got caught on. So I got hands-on in the Gold Pyramid in the 80s. Stephen Halpern was there. He's been on our radio show. Anyway, it welcomed in the 80s and this new movement. And it wasn't the New Age, it was the Ascension Age, but it really didn't happen. And then we had a benchmark for 12/21/12, which we all did, but it didn't. People weren't awake yet, so we had to add the solar flash, which was 2017, which was just happened, which was the 21st of August. And then you have 2.5 years, and it puts it at 2020. So I don't know how to do that in your term on your 2000, whatever you say, 5,000 or 920. But I used to say that, didn't I, Janet? The same thing Russell says. Remember? Years ago.
Yes.
I used to use that too, that term, Russell. So where are you getting that term? But that is the Ascension, and we're supposed to be teaching it, what I know, to everybody.
Well, it came to me just in my own head when I wrote the book, because it says manipulation of humankind by hidden UFO intelligences and the quest for transcendence. I used the word transcendence before I even tied in with any of Wilcox's material talking about the ascension. He just wrote a book called The Ascension Mysteries, where he's talking about Fragile Coretti and the impending solar flash. There's an interesting dovetail into fundamentalist Christian circles too, because you hear about the rapture where in a twinkling of an eye, there'll be a transformation and people will meet the Lord in the air, and a new heaven and a new earth, everything will become new. So in just about every culture on earth, they have some version of this event where the sun sheds its corona somehow and it winds up doing some sort of dimensional shift where the beings on the human life wave that resonate at a certain frequency move on to some other level, and then everybody else either stays here. I don't know what happens to them.
There's some of them transcend. I've seen it happen. I've also seen some go back to the black box, and now I've seen them go into the underbelly where that's called heaven and hell, but there's heaven and hell here on earth, allegedly, purportedly in our mythos, but it's basically saying the same thing that they do universally. So when they divide up the beings are those that you say they reincarnate or come back and have to do it again. So that's the explanation for that. But the ones that I don't...
Box?
Yes.
So what's black box?
It means Santa Claus found out who is naughty and who is nice.
Yeah, it's service to others, and that sorts us, and yeah, naughty and nice. So the black box, the belly, the down under. Anyway, you'll have to explain these terms. We're running out of time. We'll have to do this again, maybe even next weekend if you're available, Russell. But what's a black box, TJ? Before you get too far.
That's it's like the place where you get reassembled. They used it even in Egypt when they would redo people and try to put them together with all kind of things.
So where'd you see this?
I didn't see it.
You said that you saw this. Where did you see this?
Well, it's a term. It's a term
you
for.
Saw it.
It's a soul recreation. It's like a.
Yeah, I know exactly. Ibsen used the same thing in Peer Gynt, where Peer Gynt was going to be thrown back into the button molder, so he wouldn't be a specific individual anymore because he was a failure. He wasn't true to himself.
And even Michael Newton talks about it. But my question is, where did you see this? You said you saw it.
Well,
what did you see it?
Okay, if you've got to be literal, I saw it when I was in Egypt. Oh my gosh. Okay, here we go. Sorry, folks. We'll have to come back next Saturday. Tune in.
To be continued.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Oscar's freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
The blood is filling with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. Your heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are too weak to move.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting to danger. Unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio.
Travels to Earth through the rainbow crystal bubbles from the furthest reaches of space and time, across the dimensions, through the elements, and in harmony with the colors of the universe. Through her mastery of abstract stream of consciousness malapropisms, she weaves a web of comic, satiric, cosmic conversation. Her subjects can range from Norman, the goose next door, to astrology and earth changes, and into the deep recesses of the soul matrix. She holds a wealth of knowledge on herbs, plants, and astrology. Join Mona and her guests on adventures of a feral hippie as she touches the earthly radio waves 5 days a week at 2 p.m. Monday to Friday on Studio B at Revolution Radio.
The Secret Society Revealed.
Medicine is one of the most difficult, fast-paced, yet rewarding paths you can take. You can set out on your own and navigate the student loans, the bureaucracies, and systems that define a typical medical career. Or you can apply for the U.S. Army's Health Professions Scholarship Program and launch yourself into a medical career like no other. Your tuition will be completely covered, and when you graduate med school, you'll learn from and work with some of the most elite minds in medicine. That's the Army difference. Learn more and apply today at goarmy.com/HPSB.